Today we're diving into the controversial world of Winston Blackmore, the FLDS bishop in Canada with over 150 children and dozens of wives. His name is at the center of Canada's polygamy debates, and his story has sparked major legal battles.
We're reacting to the Fifth Estate documentary, which digs into his leadership and community. We'll also be sharing how his practices echo a lot of what Sam experienced growing up in the FLDS.
There's so much to unpack, so stick around. You don't want to miss our take on this. Welcome back, everyone. My name is Sam.
And I'm Melissa.
I was raised in a family with 4 moms and 35 kids. We were members of the FLDS Church, which is a polygamous group run by their prophet Warren Jeffs, who is now serving a life sentence in prison.
I was raised mainstream LDS in Utah. Sam and I have been married for 10 years and have 2 awesome kiddos.
Yes, we do. We want to quickly thank our donors, YouTube members, and our patrons on Patreon, and all of our wonderful subscribers. We have a goal of reaching 100,000 subscribers by the end of this year, so if you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe.
Yes, thank you all so much. We are excited to do a reaction to this video. We've had a lot of people request us talking more about Winston Blackmore, who was an FLDS bishop in Canada.
Yes, which is fascinating to me to finally get and dive into a little bit more about this group in Canada there in Bountiful. Because growing up in the FLDS church, I would hear about them all the time. I've personally met Winston Blackmore multiple times in his family, that he would come down to Short Creek or the Hilldale, Colorado City, where I was raised, in the big white passenger vans with all of his huge family that he has for different events and things. So I would see them here and there, and I would hear stories about the Canadian group, and for some reason they seem to always have more fun than we did. So I'm very excited to see maybe some of the serious things that happened there, as this show will kind of give us a little walkthrough of what it was like for the FLDS people in Canada.
Yep, here we go. Okay, yes.
Wow, that was quick.
Sorry.
Alrighty,
Original
so much
air
to talk
date
about.
is in 2003. So when I originally looked this up and it said 7 years old, I was like, wow, that's pretty old. But
this is
21 years
actually,
is a long time.
This is actually good, though, because this was aired during the time, this was during the height of the FLDS. So in 2002 is when Warren Jeffs took over. So as many of you already know, if you know much about Warren Jeffs, his father passed away in 2002. Warren Jeffs took over in 2000, and I wonder if they're going to cover this, but I don't know for sure. So just a quick history. Warren Jeffs took over in 2002. He was caught by law enforcement. He was on the run from FBI and other law enforcement for years, and he was caught in 2006. And then he has been in prison ever since. So this was at the height. This was Warren Jeffs just took over. Things are just crazy and starting to really take a turn for the FLDS people. I was in the middle of all of that during this time. So I'm excited to see what Canada was like during the time that I was still very much involved.
Yeah, you were a teenager.
I was. I would have been 13.
Yep. Okay, I'm excited.
Of the thousands of elementary schools in Canada, only one teaches its students how to become a god.
You're preparing for the greatest law, to become a god. The prophets tell us no man can become a god if he only has one wife. To be a god, he must have many wives. If you don't live it and abide it, you will be damned.
Well. we could take the next hour and just talk about what just happened here.
40 seconds in the documentary, hour-long video, done.
So, oh my gosh. And I don't want to get into too many details, but yes, just first of all, the music, and then Warren Jeffs' voice, and those two together, wow. The amount of just memories, and I don't want to say triggering, but kind of triggering, just because of the experiences that I had in those types of settings with the music, the prayer, Warren Jeffs preaching, and then saying things that I heard my entire life. And this is why the FLDS people believe that polygamy is such an important part in their life, and in order to return to become like God and to become a God themselves, is because of this, exactly what we're hearing here. Warren Jeffs taught and taught and taught again.
And this doctrine is not just within polygamous communities. Just to be clear, this is within all of Mormonism. When Warren Jeffs is saying that prophets have said that to become a god, he's talking about original founding prophets of Mormonism, prophets that both the mainstream church and fundamentalists both believe in, right? So when he's talking about this, it's not something that is absurd to any sect within Mormonism. And it took me years and years and part of our faith journey leaving, realizing that that wasn't common within Christianity. Like, I knew it was special to us that we believed that you could become like a god, but I didn't realize it was offensive to other groups. And I recently was talking with someone, and they were talking about how in their Sunday school, in their Christian Sunday school, they had learned that to even say or to try to become like a god at all in any way is considered like of the devil.
Right.
And I grew up that like that's your whole purpose in life, is to become not just like God, but to literally become a god, the same as he is.
Yeah, it's taught over and over again in mainstream Mormonism and the FLDS and all the break offshoots that our purpose in this life is to learn who God is and how to become like him.
Yeah.
That's taught all throughout Mormonism, any sect you want to look at. So this is no surprise, but it's the voice. It's the Warren Jeffs voice that really just was like, oh, wow. That just really brings back so many feelings in my mind.
The voice belongs to the prophet of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, no relation to the mainstream Mormon church. For over 2 decades.
That was their PR person.
No relation.
No relation to them.
Which is true at this point, which is true, but they all came from the same beginnings.
Beginnings, yes. But it's really important to the mainstream Mormon church that they try to separate themselves as far as they possibly can from polygamy. And they've been trying to do that since like 1890, but they're very closely related cousins. The last prophet within the mainstream LDS church that did still practice polygamy was clear into the 1950s. So it's
not that far.
It's not that far off. So sometimes when people try to make it sound too distant, I feel like that's like not very authentic.
Right.
So just want to point that out.
The Canadian voice of this breakaway sect belonged to Winston Blackmore.
There were polygamists in the Old Testament. So I would just say that that's as good a place as any to explain the divinity of polygamy.
And if you don't live that way, what happens to you?
You'll go to hell.
Wow.
Okay.
Okay. So, and first of all, just back a couple frames here. Winston Blackmore wasn't the prophet of this group. He is simply a bishop. I guess that's not super simple, but he was the bishop. So he was in charge in a way, but at this time, at least, Warren Jeffs was his leader, his direct boss, if you want to call it that. Warren Jeffs was the prophet for them as well.
Okay, so here's something interesting about her saying the words like, then you go to hell if you don't live polygamy. Within the mainstream LDS church, the way I was raised, we didn't really talk about hell the way that other Christian churches do. We talk about there being multiple kingdoms of glory, and we talk about outer darkness where like sons of perdition go. It's very rare. Basically, we're like murderers and rapists basically are the only ones that are going to go to outer darkness, or people who deny the Holy Ghost. That's kind of it. But it seems like the FLDS talk about hell. So when she says she's going to go to hell, what did that mean for you in the FLDS, believing that if you didn't practice polygamy?
In the FLDS church, you know, using the same scripture and doctrine that you are referring to, they did often teach about the different degrees of glory, and that you can only reach the highest degree of glory if you are following all of the rules. But they didn't give a whole lot of time and attention to any degree of glory between the highest and hell, which is the worst. And hell in their mind would simply mean that you are shunned from God's presence, and that you will be in eternal misery, and that you will not be given the blessings of that you won't be giving any blessings from God. You will just basically be shunned and cast into outer darkness, where Satan will be the king and ruler of that place. And so whatever Satan puts in place for you is what you got to deal with, but you won't be happy.
So the equivalent would be outer darkness.
Yeah, basically.
So did they even really, did they ever talk about terrestrial or the celestial kingdoms?
Like I say, they did teach about them. They were in the scriptures. And maybe,
but you just ignore those.
And maybe it was more talked about before Warren Jeffs, because Warren Jeffs used a lot of fear. His tactics, it was all about fear, to keep people in line. And so it was, hey, you be perfectly obedient to me, ultimate blessings, a most amazing afterlife you can possibly imagine. You do one thing wrong, you just make the simplest mistake, I cast you out of here. And in a sense, you're being cast to hell because of that one thing. Unless, of course, he would always throw the fishing line out there and try to give some kind of hope, unless you repent. Problem with that is, a lot of times people didn't know what they were repenting for. And even if they did know what they were repenting for, they could be cast out from the community forever. Some people I know today that were kicked out of the community by Warren Jeffs are still not allowed back.
Crazy.
So,
Crazy.
And they've been gone for years.
God's endorsement of polygamy is the core belief of some 1,000 people living in a secluded and secretive community called Bountiful. It's tucked away in the Creston Valley, lying in the shadow of the East Kootenay Mountains of British Columbia. This peaceful valley holds some pretty sensational secrets about men who father up to 80 children with some 30 wives, about teenage girls who are forced into marriage with men old enough to be their grandfathers. It's all part of a belief that the more children a man produces, the better his chances of entering the celestial kingdom, finding salvation, and possibly becoming a god himself.
I think the negative focus on our religion as a felony is disgusting.
This 10-year-old footage provides a rare glimpse into Winston Blackmore, the longtime leader of Bountiful. He likes to preach to the converted, not talk to reporters. But after months of negotiation, Blackmore agreed to sit down with the Fifth Estate, although he was reluctant to discuss his 20-plus wives and 80 children.
Who said I have 20 wives and 80 children?
Oh, how many wives and how many children do you have then?
Well, I'm certainly not here to talk about my private life. I have agreed to say that I have more wives than one.
That's your private life? I got one husband, I'll tell you.
Well, good for you. I hope you love him and take care of him and don't criticize him and support him and do all the things that wives should do with their husbands. And I sure would hope that you wouldn't sit around here with people and talk about your private life, because I'd scold you.
Okay, sorry.
You can tell he's used to being in charge just by the way he talks. He's used to being
in charge of it,
in
particularly
authority.
Women.
Wow.
Because then I'd scold you for that. But to say, okay, we all know, obviously, the reason that he's not wanting to say anything is because it's illegal. It's illegal in Canada. It's illegal in the U.S. But to also be willing to have an interview like this and try to avoid that and say that's a private matter when it's the whole basis of your religion is also hilarious. But the fact that he's going to scold her, whew.
It's interesting to me because throughout the church, throughout the FLDS Canadian group, the Southern Utah and Arizona group, they're very proud of the big families, the many wives, many children within the church. But, of course, when he's sitting down with an outsider, he's going to try to keep that a secret, because that is something the FLDS church is very good at, is keeping secrets.
Yep.
For doing that. I bet you would. Yes, I would, because I'm no more interested in that than I think that the public should be interested in mine.
So how many wives do you have?
I have enough so that I don't have to worry about anybody else's.
Oh my gosh.
Blackmore is more forthcoming. She says she is the first of 26 wives who have given Winston Blackmore 80 children.
Men are the head of the household and are very, very gifted in knowing what women should do. If a man is very good and has found favor in the eyes of the prophet, then he's given a position and more wives.
Do you notice she said in favor of the eyes? And I was waiting for her to say in the eyes of the Lord, because that's a very common saying, right? You want to find favor in the eyes of the Lord, but she said in favor of the eyes of the prophet.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Which is pretty typical. Like the FLDS, like I said, in my mind as being raised LDS would be you want to have favor with the Lord. And the FLDS, the way that Warren Jeffs puts himself like as a God or above God all the time to everyone, the fact that that was her thought was to be in favor of the prophet, then he gets more wives, which makes sense.
Keep in mind as well that because they are taught and believe that they can become a god, Warren Jeffs and the people that believed in him believed that he was well on his way to becoming this god. So that's one of the reasons they looked at him as a god, because he was on his way to become one. You know, I mean, yes, he was still speaking with God, but he was going to be right up there with God pretty soon here. So that's one of the reasons that they could look at him that way and not feel guilty, I guess you could say.
Yeah, you can see the interviewer's face as she's being told that men know what to tell,
that was
how
an
to tell
interesting
women.
Thing.
Yeah, that men are
very good
at telling women what to do.
That's sad.
And women should do what men tell them to do.
You know, I don't understand the sort of theological application for this.
I don't either.
Because that's for men to know and women to obey. This polygamist rule book, called Purity in the New and Everlasting Covenant of Marriage, lays out the doctrine on which they base their religion. It explains plural marriage is a sacred ordinance designed to take a man into the eternal worlds and exalt him and make a god out of him. It is all based on God's command to Adam to go forward and multiply. Well, this group takes it literally. They believe the practice of polygamy is a holy law that stands above and beyond any human law. 46-year-old Jane Black.
Sorry, I want to point out these pictures. Wow. There were multiple people, and some of that footage was in Short Creek, in Colorado City, and Hilldale. And the amount of faces that I saw just in that brief clip and recognized them and could tell you their names, it's just wow. And I don't know where this footage came from.
Yeah.
But it's crazy and so fun to see some of these people that were so much younger back then that some of them I haven't seen in so many years as well. It's just really fascinating. I don't know where they're getting this footage, but I'm glad they found it.
Yeah.
Blackmore was born into this, to believe the only way she would get to heaven is if some man invited her. So subservience, compliance, and dependence were the rule.
It's expected that I would be a very obedient girl and do what my parents wanted me to do, and grow up and marry whom I was appointed to marry and be a mother.
Did you ever waver in that? Ever?
No, I didn't.
Debbie Palmer and Jane Blackmore are sisters from a prominent family. Their father, Dalman Oler, who helped found Bountiful back in 1947, had 6 wives and 47 children. Debbie, Jane, and the other girls were expected to be demure, unobtrusive, and obedient, especially in front of Daddy.
Mm-hmm.
Because I love you, Daddy of mine, I love you so. I love you so.
Okay, wow. So it's not that uncommon, actually, for families within the FLDS to have these, if you want to call them performances or little skits and things like that. That was something common in my family, and I know throughout most families in the FLDS. One of the things that I recall as a teenager and boy growing up in the FLDS is my father he liked it when us boys would sing. And so he for some reason, he just really thought it was amazing when all of us older boys would get together and sing a hymn or something like that. So when I saw these daughters singing a song, it took me back to my days of singing a song in front of the family, just like that.
Wow. Do you think it was just because there wasn't a lot of other entertainment, and so
100%.
singing and music was
Yes.
a form of entertainment?
That was a big part of it, because instead of going and watching a movie, if you wanted some kind of entertainment and it wasn't light outside, it's nighttime, most people turn on the TV. We didn't have a TV, so, well, let's find a way to entertain ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
Eldest daughter, Debbie, was only 15 when her father gave her away to become wife number 6 to a 57-year-old man. You were stepmother to how many children?
To 32 children.
And you were 15?
Yes, I was. Most of his children were older than I was.
But a 15-year-old girl, even if you were a fervent believer, this is a 57-year-old man, it's got to be scary.
If that's all you've ever known, and you see girls that age being married to men that age and older all the time, it's really not that difficult of a stretch of the imagination.
Unfortunately, that's true. That's something that I would see within my own family and throughout the community. It didn't seem to faze people as much as it should have.
Yeah, the more people that we've talked to, and the more that you and I have talked to sisters and other people within the community too, I think part of the reason that it doesn't faze them also is because they have no knowledge of the sexual aspect of marriage.
Right.
Most of them have not been taught anything before marriage. They're told that their husbands will teach them what they need to know, and they're so young and vulnerable that I don't think they even fully comprehend, other than I'm going to get married and I'm going to become a mother, which is what I'm told my whole purpose in this life to do, is to be a good wife and to be a good mother. But I don't think they recognize the other portion to it that interviewers are referring to when they say, isn't that hard? Isn't it weird? Didn't it make you feel uncomfortable? I feel like not just the age gap, but most of the time, the rest of the world is talking about the sexual relationship that's about to ensue in a marriage.
That's why it's so disturbing.
That's why it's so disturbing to the world, right? Is because of that aspect of it. I mean, that's the largest piece of the uncomfort. And I think a lot of these girls go into that not even recognizing that. And so they don't have that discomfort because they don't know what's coming, which makes it more heartbreaking in my mind.
Well, and these young girls are given classes and trainings on how to be a good wife and a mother. They are put through these different classes and trainings. But in these trainings, all that is doing basically is telling them to obey perfectly the prophet and their husband. Mm-hmm. It's preparing them to say, yes, I'll do whatever you want me to do. The preparation is to just keep sweet and be happy about it. So that when they are put into a situation that is probably extremely uncomfortable, their training has simply taught them to say, okay.
Yeah, they've been groomed to be able to be child brides.
Yeah, it just makes me sick.
Yeah.
This is where Bountiful comes looking for new blood. The head office of their religion, just north of the Grand Canyon in Colorado City. 10,000 people living in polygamy. Children here are taught outsiders are evil and that women are the servants of men. That's the reason Craig Chatwin believes this is a cult and why he got out 11 years ago.
Wow, that's definitely a view that I'm used to seeing, or that I saw a lot of. And to say, turn off your video camera, people in the FLDS, including myself as a young boy, we did not like outsiders in our community, especially when we started seeing video cameras of any kind. Some people would get very angry, and others, like myself, would just run as fast as we could. We were terrified of outsiders, especially those with cameras.
Yeah. What did you think about them saying, like, that they believed outsiders were evil and that women were meant to be servants to men?
Yeah.
All checks out?
Yeah, there's not much more to say to that other than that is accurate.
Raised in this cult, and there's just an enormous amount. They have no comprehension of an outside world. It bothers me that males here with authority use their authority to leverage sexual favors from young girls. And that's essentially what they're doing. They take young wives, these older men, they're using their authority positions to gain access to young females. And they do it by the hordes. The brethren here in top positions have 50 plus wives. Unbelievable.
That's one part of it that always, I mean, we hear different families, different polygamous groups within Mormonism offshoots that talk about, you know, that certain prophets or apostles said that you have to have 3 wives, right, in order to make it to the celestial kingdom. Did they ever say why they need 50? Why they need 26? Why Warren Jeffs needs, what is it, 70?
All I can say is that looking throughout the community when I was there, the families with more wives had a higher position, a higher standing. They were more righteous. They were more worthy. They were somehow superior to those that had less wives. So I think other than just power and authority, I can't think of any other reason.
Okay.
It also seems unbelievable to Ron Barton, who is with the Utah State Attorney General's office. A seasoned cop, he was surprised at what he found while investigating child abuse and incest in some polygamous communities.
If a man, an older man, seduces a 13-year-old girl, he doesn't commit, in his own mind, he doesn't commit sexual abuse on that girl. Once he's successful in having intercourse with her, then in his own mind, he views himself as married.
If no one comes forward to complain, Barton has no case.
If it's not bothering anybody, why don't we all just mind our own business?
Well, and that's been the attitude for many years in Utah, and I think in other states where fundamentalists live, is that this is a victimless crime. They're not bothering anybody, nobody is being injured, and that's simply not true. We establish laws to protect young women, and we can't have a second standard for girls that grow up in Colorado City, a lesser standard, and say, that's fair.
Craig?
That's very well said.
Yes, and I have to say, though, being in it, growing up, we definitely looked at it as we are doing nothing wrong. Once again, I was a teenager. Who was I to say what was actually going on with the adults and all of the marriages and things, and most of this stuff being done behind closed doors that I wasn't even aware of so much of it. I left at age 18, so it just, there was a lot of unknown to me and a lot of just unaware of what it would be like to be in a marriage in general, let alone being a young girl. Like, I just look at my sisters and other young girls I knew out there, and I just am so sad to know what their future held for them. And some of my sisters got out, others did not.
Yeah.
And so I agree with him, though, is what I'm getting at, is that it's not as simple as, well, they're not hurting anyone. How do you know? It's a closed off society. There's more going on than meets the eye.
And I can say, from being raised in a community right outside of Hilldale, like growing up in St. George, it was only a 45-minute drive. And I grew up, especially with being raised mainstream LDS, with the mentality of they're not hurting anyone, they're just practicing their religious beliefs. But we didn't know about the child brides. Like, we didn't know that that was happening in basically our backyard. Like, everybody that I knew that was saying that, we didn't know what was going on that way. We just thought they were just practicing plural marriage. Hey, they're our cousins. It's very similar to our beliefs. You know, they just are following not the right prophet, but it's still the same doctrine. We need to leave them alone. They're not hurting anyone. I think that's a lot of, especially here in the early 2000s, like, I think that was the mentality for a lot of communities around. And then there were only some people, and luckily, like this guy, who are recognizing and seeing what's happening and saying, no, well, we can't let that happen. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
In the last 10 years, traffic has been heavy on the road to Bountiful. Colorado City has provided Blackmore's community with a lot of ladies, nearly doubling its population. It's also raised alarm bells for the Canadian immigration officers on the Idaho-BC border because there were a lot of visitors coming in and a whole lot less going back. Carol Anderson has turned some of these American girls away. She knew where they were headed and why.
I've refused admission to them because I didn't think they were visitors. I've refused admission because I felt they were coming here to get married. There is no class under Canada's immigration law by which they can be sponsored in as a plural spouse. The law prohibits it.
Because this is very interesting. Under the Immigration Act, it's illegal to have multiple wives, but nobody's prosecuting anyone in Canada for polygamy.
It's a very interesting position, and that's one that I feel the government is going to have to deal with.
I hadn't thought about it from an immigration standpoint.
Me neither.
Like people coming in and not going out even though they're saying that they're visitors.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I did know that there were a lot of people from Colorado City area going up to Canada and vice versa, people from Canada coming down. So I knew that this was happening, and now looking back, it looks very similar to human trafficking to me now, right? Yeah. What was going on. But in that time, I just assumed, wow, there's the gospel is spreading. There's people here, there's people there, and then there you would hear of other places being opened up. So it was an exciting time if you believed what Warren Jeffs was teaching was true.
Mm.
This is Bountiful, a community nestled in an idyllic corner of southeastern British Columbia on the Idaho border, where folks marry and procreate with religious zeal, where polygamy is next to godliness.
I don't think you could begin to understand.
Jane Blackmore has 7 children and 4 grandchildren, and she has shared her husband, Winston Blackmore, with 25 other women.
Why is it so hard to approach some understanding?
Well, before you can understand, you have to basically be born into the community and be taught that way of life.
Jane Blackmore was not only born...
Yeah, man, I just, watching her and listening to her, she's clearly not happy, right? What, does any of her conversation give any kind of happiness vibes? She seems just completely defeated to me.
Yeah, I think she's trying hard to say what she's supposed to say. I feel like, yeah, in her eyes, I just see a hope of, I'm being interviewed. I hope I don't say anything wrong because I need to say exactly what I'm supposed to say. And I need to prove that everything's okay. It almost seems like a nervousness.
Yeah, and I don't know if what she is saying is meant to come across the way that it does, but when she says something like, you couldn't even begin to understand, when she said that, her voice made it sound like, what I'm going through is more than you can comprehend. That is what I heard when she said that. That's what it sounded like. I don't know if that was her intention or not, but
yeah,
that's what it seems.
And it kind of is true. It's hard to understand if you haven't been raised in it, right? Especially, we've kind of talked about this before. I think it's Mike King who talks about this quite a bit, that when you're born into certain groups, it's a whole different mentality than somebody who's converted into a high demand religion or cult. It's just a whole different mentality because you don't know any different. You didn't come to terms with this new ideology. You weren't taking your other worldview and making it fit. It is your entire worldview. Right. It is your entire identity.
What your parents taught you. It's everything. Yeah.
Into it, she lived it dutifully for over 2 decades as the first of Winston Blackmore's 26 wives. This former bishop was the most powerful man in Bountiful. He decided who should marry whom and who deserved to have more wives than the next guy.
He got to decide instead of the prophet, huh?
Well, I don't know what kind of power he had before Warren Jeffs, but I do know that Warren Jeffs would not have allowed him to make those kind of decisions on his own. I do know that he was in charge up in Canada, but unless it was before Warren Jeffs, I don't think he was in charge of who was marrying who.
Maybe he was just the one that performed the marriages.
Maybe he was helping in that, and maybe he was giving recommendations to the prophet. Maybe that was one of his ways of, making that decision. Was he was recommending, hey, so and so should marry this person and things like that. Maybe that was what.
And then the prophet would pray about it and decide.
Right.
Bountiful is like a journey back in time. What is most noticeable is the number of young pregnant girls with toddlers in tow. Most Bountiful brides are married in the eyes of their religion, but not under the law. A law which says children under 16 need not only their parents' permission, but a judge's signature. And when it comes to sex, a child between 12 and 14 may have intercourse, but their partner must be less than 2 years older.
How come in your community old men marry young girls?
There's not very many people that are much older than I am in our community.
But they do get married at 14 and 15.
There's been nobody getting married at 14 to my knowledge.
You can tell me this seriously?
Yes, I can.
Really?
That I know of.
As if he wouldn't have knowledge of ones that did happen as the bishop.
He would know.
He would know.
There has been at 15, but they have to have their parents' consent and they have to have a reason,
15 is kind of young, don't you think?
Oh, I certainly do think it is. So, I think it's kind of young.
Do you discourage girls as young as 15?
I discourage them from doing that. Yes, I do.
What is the youngest that you know of a girl getting married? 14.
When I spoke to Winston Blackmore, I asked him about that, young girls 14, 15 getting married, and I asked him if he discourages it, and he said, yes, actively.
Her reaction says it all. Her reaction says it all.
We don't need to even, yep.
Wow.
That face.
She couldn't hide it.
Nope.
He wasn't telling you the truth?
Not in all instances, no. That's not the truth.
When did you start questioning?
I've always had questions. Well, I'll tell you one small story. Just since I have been a midwife, I have a very close relationship with a lot of women from the community. And there was this 15-year-old girl who was married, and she became pregnant just very, very soon after she was married. And she was crying. She didn't want to be married. She didn't want to be pregnant. She was 15. This girl's mother was married to Winston. She's not Winston's daughter. And I said, Winston, weren't you supposed to be this girl's parent? Like, this girl mother is married to you. Like, aren't you supposed to be her parent? Like, I said, how come? How come she was married? She was 15. And he said, well, Mother, I want you to mind your business because you are not the bishop. And I said, this is my business. These girls come to me and I deal with it. So I said, I think this is my business and I don't think these girls should be married.
The sad thing is, no matter what she advises him or tells him that it is her business, at the end of the day, she's not going to get any say in any type of change because she is a woman.
Yep.
At 15 and becomes pregnant, it's unlikely she will be going to her high school graduation. Anyway, the school in Bountiful only goes up to grade 10. Even so, BC taxpayers fund this independent school with approximately $700,000 every year. The chief administrator is Winston Blackmore.
I would like my children to stop at grade 10, have an opportunity to go work for a little while, and if they want to go back to school, they'll go back as a mature student who will get something out of high school. And instead of just a playtime.
It's interesting he says that, because based on other stories we've heard, he loved putting people to work at a very young age. And the workforce for him to get the work done that he wanted, that would ultimately make him money, very convenient that he had them go to work at a young age and then let them decide. Now, my question is, during this time that they're working, how much convincing coming from him was there that they don't need any more education after that?
Well, and I'm sure they don't need any money since they're just children too. So I'm sure they're working without any pay.
Or very little, at least.
Even grade 10, there are only, 2 or 3 people who have graduated from grade 10.
Well, that's their business, not mine. It's their family's business, not mine, and I don't keep track of that.
I don't share that opinion at all. I have 6 children out in the workforce, and at least 4 of those 6, they cried when they had to quit school. They wanted to go to school.
Deprived.
Once again, though, they're not going to have a choice, because whatever the bishop or the priesthood head of that community or that family says is going to be what happens.
And he made it sound like, if I had it my way, then this is what I would recommend for them. No, he's getting his way. Mm-hmm. As the bishop of the FLDS church, the bishop's getting his way.
They have been around so long and contributed so much to the economy of the place that the folks of the Creston Valley have pretty much come to accept the Polygamists of Bountiful as just part of the landscape. Mr. Mayor, how uncomfortable is it for you to have a band of polygamists in your backyard?
It's not. They contribute to our community. They run businesses. They purchase supplies. They purchase equipment. They purchase services in their town. It's like any other individual.
Former Mayor Don
Interesting.
Lehman says most of the 5,000 people in town feel the same.
People, I think, have adopted the live and let live attitude. You don't interfere with my pursuit of happiness, I won't interfere with yours.
That's pretty much John Kettle's take on the situation. This transplanted Texan is a local politician who also runs the city dump.
Well, there's rumors here about everybody. Let me tell you something. This is what I do think. If that were a Sikh community, if that were a Chinese community, a Native community, or a homosexual community, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation. I'm not a Bible thumper, and I'm not a very good Christian. I drink, smoke, and I will drink coconut beer brewed here in Creston, by the way, every week. But I'll tell you what, they live their religion, and I respect that. I hope more people do. You're going to have a hard time finding anybody in this valley that knows them that will say anything derogatory about them because they're good people.
That I will agree with. That if you were to go in and get to know the people, and I even say this about the Hilldale in Colorado City, where I was raised, that area, Short Creek, most of the people are just really good people trying to live their religion and live good lives. It's the leadership that brings the problems.
Yeah, exactly. I know my parents knew people from the polygamous community, and that might have been why I was raised with the whole just let them practice their religion, because they met some really awesome people, that were in plural families, but they weren't marrying young girls. They were all over age. And yeah, I think there's just so many good people. And yeah, I agree with you. It's the leadership that's the problem.
Yep, exactly.
Like any other church, this fundamentalist sect owns a lot of property. It is managed in the United States through a private trust called the United Effort Plan, which controls assets worth more than $200 million US. Their Canadian branch in Bountiful is valued at just under $4 million. The United Effort Plan's sole Canadian trustee is Winston Blackmore, who has accumulated considerable personal wealth outside the church. The Fifth Estate has tracked Blackmore's business interests in British Columbia, Alberta, and Idaho. Everything from grain and cattle farming to forestry and transportation. He'll even rent you a biffy in a jiffy. Winston Blackmore's estimated worth is more than $15 million. But as with everything else, he keeps his business to himself.
Why are your businesses privately owned? Because I thought it's all for the church.
Well, I owe half the national debt. So, before I can do anything with my property, I need to get it paid off, don't I?
But why is it owned? Why do you own it privately?
Because I started it as a business.
Blackmore's wealth and wives are no problem for his neighbors in Creston because, says Sister Carol, money talks.
They are a major economic force, and if you're in a capitalistic society that the bottom line is business, the bottom line is don't bother Bountiful because they are good business.
I just have to point out here that this is my personal opinion. I haven't heard this for sure as a fact, but at this point, and many years ago, Winston Blackmore separated himself from the FLDS. He left the FLDS church after Warren Jeffs took over and had been in charge for a while. And he says that he did it because he didn't agree with some of the things that Warren Jeffs was doing. Now, personal opinion here, I feel that Warren Jeffs wanted to be in charge of his money.
Mm-hmm.
Because Warren Jeffs wanted to be in charge of everybody's money. He wanted to be the person that could take everything away from you if you disobeyed him. Mm-hmm. I have a feeling he went up to Winston Blackmore and said, I need to be in charge of all of your money, all of your companies, all of your property. And I have a feeling, based on his opinion, how strong it is, that he said, no, not going to happen.
Oh, yeah. I totally agree with you on that.
The only bother Bountiful ever really got was back in 1990, when some women who had fled the sect demanded an investigation. They wanted to know why Canada was turning a blind eye when the criminal code says any kind of marriage or conjugal union with more than one person at the same time is a criminal offense, with a penalty of 5 years in jail. The Creston RCMP did launch an investigation.
421 16th Avenue South.
Copy, Creston. I'll be en route.
Sergeant Randy Cook.
And the investigation confirmed, yeah, they're polygamous?
I don't know that there was any denial of that fact in the initial investigation.
Why isn't that enough for you to go in there and make arrests?
The only thing I can answer to that question is that there was an investigation conducted by the RCMP in this area. The evidence was gathered and it was forwarded to the Attorney General's ministry.
So the RCMP recommended charges in 1991, but the BC government did not approve them. They were afraid that they could lose a challenge under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. British Columbia's Attorney General is Jeff Plant.
Your job is to enforce the criminal code. Polygamy is against the law. Why do you choose to exempt the polygamous colony of Bountiful?
Well, I don't choose to exempt them. I think that polygamy per se, practiced between and among adults, may actually raise some issues around what our Constitution says in terms of the vigorous way it protects religious freedom.
As it now stands, it appears the people in Bountiful really don't have to answer to any authority but their own.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but I also wouldn't underestimate the complexity of the issue. And I think that in the long run, the system of justice will not be well served if we pursue something that fails.
There is that whole issue of law, but there's also an issue of justice.
I think that's a good argument, and certainly is kind of another way of putting the sense of duty I feel towards making sure that we do try to advance this thing towards some measure of resolution one way or the other.
It is a tricky one.
Winston Blackmore is ready to do battle with the law. His sword is his religion, his shield is the charter.
Same charter that protects the gay and the lesbian community, and the same one that protects common law relationships, and the same one that protects unfaithful husbands, and the same one that protects unfaithful wives.
Blackmore's marriages are celestial, not legal, so technically he says he's not really a polygamist, just an adulterer.
Polygamy, by the definition of it, is to have two relationships going at the same time. And there are far more people than we are that do that. I know there are.
That was always a thing that I always heard, was that it was a lot more respectable for a man to say that he has multiple wives than for him to be just sleeping around with lots of women with no sense of responsibility at all.
Right. And here's the thing. Polygamy is practiced all over the world, you know, and it is it's an idea that's been around for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that I agree with polygamy, but I am saying that that's not the big issue here.
Yep, that's not what these
It's
law
an
enforcements
issue,
are wanting.
but it's not the big issue here. The big issue here is child brides, people being coerced because of their religion to believe that getting married to an older man at a very young age is somehow okay.
Mm-hmm.
No, that is abuse. That is plain and simple. It's abuse. So that's the big problem here.
Yeah, and there's child labor as well, because, I can't remember if we watched another documentary or something that talked about Winston Blackmore. He's talking about taking 10th graders out and having them work. And if I remember right, he's not paying them a fair wage, right? So he's making his millions of dollars off the back of child labor. And
you know, he says, though, he says it's to their benefit. I'm teaching them skills. I'm teaching them how to work hard to prepare them for the world. So, of course, he has twisted it to make it seem like, oh, it's all good. No. This is like a trade school. They should be paying me. I'm teaching them. So they always find a way to twist it to make it sound good.
But those are the issues that the law should be going after. It's not the practice of polygamy that's the problem. It's all the secondary crimes that go along with it.
Yep.
But the tenet of your religion is that polygamy is a divine institution. You endorse it, you live it, you admit to it.
He's so over it.
I don't understand.
Well,
I don't understand how having a lot of wives is religious freedom.
well, do you understand the Charter's allowance for free association?
Yes.
Then you certainly ought to be able to understand the Charter's allowance for freedom of religion. And you certainly ought to be able to understand that we all have a right to freely live, you know, so long as we honor the code of decency, which allows that everybody mind their own business.
So far, everyone seems to be doing just that, minding their own business. There is no investigation going on at the moment because the RCMP says it has no appetite to lay charges if BC's Attorney General does not have the will to prosecute. But the law seems pretty straightforward. Polygamy is a crime the federal government wants prosecuted. In fact, a Department of Justice briefing note dated October 93 says there are limits to religious freedom, especially if religious practice comes into conflict with the law. It also says Ottawa is ready to help British Columbia in any charter defense. So it is up to BC's Attorney General to uphold that law.
These days, polygamists aren't as worried about breaking the law as they are about the breakup of their church. The death of the supreme ruler, polygamous prophet Rulon T. Jeffs, left a vacuum at the top. 5,000 mourners gathered in Colorado City last September to say goodbye to the 93-year-old mouthpiece of God. Rulon Jeffs left an estimated 60 wives and
I just saw parts of my family in that group. I'm
my
like, whoa,
word.
wait, that's my brother. This is so crazy.
Do you remember did you go to the funeral?
Oh, of course. I was there. In fact, if we look close enough, we might be able to spot me somewhere in this crowd.
90 children, but no one to take his place. A grab for power set polygamist against polygamist until Warren Jeffs, the dead prophet's son, announced he was the new prophet. Not everyone is happy, and there is talk of a splinter group making tracks for Bountiful, BC, to rally round their man, Winston Blackmore. But his wife, Jane, won't be one of them. She no longer wants to be one of 26 wives. She no longer cares about helping her husband become a god. Jane Blackmore is leaving Bountiful.
I don't want to be part of it. And I have a 9-year-old girl who is very intelligent, and I don't want her to be married when she's 15 or 16 or 17.
Oh man, I'm glad that she got out. We also know that since then, Winston Blackmore did serve time. So Canada obviously did decide to pursue him at some point. Maybe we should do another video kind of following up from an update from that point when they're doing this. And obviously he's not cooperating. I don't know if I could even call that a real interview with him.
Right.
But from this until what's happened now with Winston Blackmore and his separation from the FLDS.
Yeah.
But this gives a good ground laying of what that community looked like, what was happening up there at the same time that Sam was growing up in Short Creek in the FLDS at that time.
Something he said just stuck in my head, and I feel like I have to address this. He said, Winston Blackmore, he said, I think that people should be left alone as long as they are being decent. And when he said that, I just said, decent according to who? That's all I could think of. Decent according to who? The problem is that people are setting this standard of decency based on their worldview. And sometimes within these groups, a girl that is being forced to do something and is just keeping all of her emotions and fear and sadness and whatever else may come along with that to herself because she's been taught to keep sweet no matter what. It may seem decent to the man that is forcing her to do that because the prophet told him to do it. It's not. It's not. Anyway.
Yeah. It's sad to see what so many of these communities, where it tends to end up, right? Like they said before, it ends up with money, it ends up with power, it ends up with sexual stuff and mistreatment of women and children, and it's just hard to see. If anyone has other questions or things that they want us to review as far as other documentaries like this or other YouTube videos, please let us know down in the comments. We love to respond to and make content that you guys want to watch and that you want to hear from us.
Yes. Yes, we do. So thank you for all of you who recommended this to us. And if you are interested in getting an update on Winston Blackmore and the Canadian group, please feel free to let us know in the comments below. Thank you all so much for being here with us again. We look forward to talking with you soon.
We'll talk to y'all soon.